Hello, my sunshines. We are here for episode 18 of your session with me, Dr. Deborah Brown. And today we are talking about all of this pop culture nonsense about mental health. I am so OCD. Oh, my ADHD is out of control. We have all heard these things. And today we're going to talk about the truth. We're going to talk about, are you really so OCD? What does that even mean? So, we're going to talk about what these things are really. We're also going to talk about, do you actually have them? And how should we talk about people that do? Okay, because that's probably my big beef when somebody says to me, oh my God, like I'm so OCD, I had to put all my clothes away. And I'm like, girl, you don't even know what OCD is, right? So we want to not use it in a way that insults people with OCD, but we also want to acknowledge, do you have a problem, right? So pop culture doesn't help us to understand the real truth. So when I say pop culture, I'm talking about the stuff you see on social media, the first things that pop up when you Google, the things that we talk about when we're together, the things we see on TV, that the reality of mental health looks much different from somebody with my lens because I've been trained for so many years and I've seen so many diagnoses in real life. So when somebody reads about OCD, it's much different than sitting in front of somebody for years and working with them through OCD. So I want to share with you today sort of the reality of all the things that we talk about, what they look like, and also a consideration for you and what you might think you have, because so many people walk around going, maybe I have this, maybe I have that. And I think that's terrible. I think it's very sad to not understand your own brain. And sometimes we attach to ideas that might not be true, that actually can be more harmful. If you walk around believing you have autism, but you don't have autism, you're creating all kinds of problems for yourself. So I'm hoping today we sort you out and we also sort out what the world is doing, and we put you out there in a way that you can have a better kind of conversation about these things. And actually, it will make you fabulously interesting at parties because whenever I go to events, I get so many mental health questions and I know some things. So maybe you'll know some things that if somebody says, I'm so OCD, you can correct them and straighten that out with them. So, what are some of the things I hear that make me cringe? My ADHD is crazy. That gave me PTSD. You know I'm a psycho when I'm on my period. He's a total narcissist. She's so bipolar. What a schizo. I'm so triggered. You know you've heard all those, right? We hear them all the time. But with me, they pierce my soul because I know what these things really are. And I also know that while you're going around saying, not you, people are going around saying, she's so bipolar. What if you're in the room with somebody who is bipolar, right? They might not tell you. Or while you're going, oh my God, I'm so OCD, and someone has a partner who's suffering with OCD, right? So that's why it's important not to use these things. I love the internet. I love the access to information. I love that you can research. I love when my patients come to me and they already have ideas about diagnosis. I don't think that's bad. I love that when they come and say, I think I might have ADHD. It's a good starting point, right? But the problem is we do have to get it right when we're not sitting in a therapy session because it's about respecting other people and looking at mental health disorders as real. It's not something that you just read about. It's real. 1 in 4 of us has a diagnosable mental health disorder. Some people say 1 in 5. I'm going with the 1 in 4. I think that's true. So, in every room you're in, somebody's got something. So let's make sure that we're honoring that. And why do words matter, right? I've heard a lot of talk in the current political climate about, oh, they're making me call them a pronoun and we're not going to use this terminology and they can't tell us what to do. And that's so sad. It is not that hard to get a pronoun right. If I have a human in front of me and they say, I would like to use she, her pronouns, what do I care? I can add a letter to the word he and make it she. It isn't that hard. Doesn't bother me any. Words matter. It matters to that person. It doesn't hurt me. That's my personal belief. I know a lot of people feel differently, but that's what I think. What if every word that we actually use reflected our values and who we are? I know we all do that sometimes where we say something and then we lay in bed at night, as we all do, and we go over our conversations and go, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I shouldn't have tried to pet that man's service dog. Why did I do that? I couldn't resist the pupper. But we all do things or say things that aren't really who we are. But I think part of this conversation is that our words matter, and we should think about certain things before we say them in a way that makes us more aware of what we're saying. So I would love it if every word that you said actually reflected what you actually feel, that you'd be able to not censor yourself. I don't not we're not doing this so that you don't say what you feel, but I think that a lot of the words that have been used over time around mental health have been really, really bad for everybody. I'll give you the example of some of the words that were used around people who were had any kind of disability were things like slow. Oh, he's slow. Retarded. Simple. He's simple. He ain't right in the head. That was a big one I grew up with. That person's a mental patient, right? These were the words that people would use. And these words evoked an image. That person is not credible. That person is not to be trusted or valued or listened to. Now, if you have a mental health disorder, would you want somebody to go, she's a mental patient? That disregards you. If 1 in 4 of us has something, me included, I don't want to be disregarded as a mental patient or simple or slow or off or crazy. I want to be heard as a human first. So we're going to get into person first language and what that really means. But I think about when I grew up and there was the special ed class, right? And anybody from my generation who grew up in the 70s as a very young child probably had this experience. There was one classroom in the school, in the middle school, that had all of the kids who didn't fit the traditional mold. So in that class, we had a kid who acted out. We had a kid who was developmentally disabled. We had a kid that didn't show up for school hardly ever. We had a girl who used a wheelchair. And I look back and I go, that was all different kinds of stuff in one room. But what we did is the people of that era, not me, took everybody who had something different or what they considered problematic and threw them all in one room. We like to put people in boxes. We still do. We don't do that anymore with special ed and with school, thank goodness. But I think about often the girl who used the wheelchair and how she was super cool and super smart and didn't have behavior problems and didn't have any learning disabilities, but she was in that class. That was wrong, right? So, how often do we do that to people where we look at them and decide something about them? I had a patient who used a wheelchair, and one of her saddest moments in our work was when she said to me, I don't get invited to things. Other people go to concerts, other people go to restaurants, and they don't invite me because of this chair. And her answer was, I have accessibility everywhere. Everywhere I go, there's a ramp, there's space for me. Almost every environment is now ready for me, but it's the people that aren't. So I think her friends, for whatever reason, believed that it would make things more difficult and it wasn't worth it. She was not a person in a wheelchair. She's a person who uses a wheelchair, right? Person first. So this isn't about canceling anybody for saying anything wrong. There's such a great example of this where in media people get canceled all the time because they say the wrong thing. Now there are some that are blatant. I'll use the obvious example. The Black Eyed Peas did a song called Let's Get It Started. I don't know when it was, a while ago, a long time ago probably. And the song was actually released as Let's Get Started. Did you know that? The song was Let's Get Started. And all these people recorded this song. All these people produced this song, put this song out, and nobody went, that's not nice. So they went back in later and they changed it, re-recorded it to Let's Get It Started, right? That one's a little more blatant to me. Like, doesn't somebody know better? Even 10 years ago, right? But there are other ones that I think we use as learning curves. I know Lizzo got in a lot of trouble because she recorded a song with the word spaz in it. And I remember seeing Lizzo's canceled over using inappropriate language for people with disabilities. And I'm like, oh my God, what did she say? And I looked and it was the word spaz. And I went, what's wrong with that? And then I looked deeper and it said people in the disability community were upset with that because it's a slur. So my first thing was to rebel against that and go, what? But then I read about it, and it's the idea of spasticity. People with cerebral palsy and other disorders of the similar type have a spasticity to them. They have a movement to them. They have sudden movements. And to call someone a spaz is to echo that. Well, I didn't know that. I thought I knew all this stuff, right? But I found it really enlightening. And I thought, okay, I just won't say that word anymore. Not a big deal, right? So then people say, "What's the word police? You won't be able to say anything." But why would we use that word when there are 12,000 other words to use, right? I don't think Lizzo meant anything. She apologized. I think she might have even taken it out. She didn't know. But I think it's almost like that in this conversation is that there's a lot we just don't know because we've learned from people doing it wrong. And the problem is, we think we're talking about everybody else. But in some ways, we're talking about ourselves and the way we want to be treated too. Person first language is one of the biggest changes you can make in the way that you talk about yourself or the way you talk about other people. The wheelchair was a great example of that. I don't say the guy in the wheelchair over there. I say, do you see that person over there? He uses a wheelchair. Do you see the difference in that? You won't believe when you change that how much better you actually feel about the language that you're using. It's like if you see a person, you don't say that black guy over there. No, do you see that? That's a guy. You see that guy over there? Right? Or if you're describing a story, "Oh, I was talking to this Puerto Rican woman." No, you were talking to a woman. Stop. Be careful about your language, person first language. Because what if somebody did that to you? Pick something about yourself, right? Some random fact and think, "Oh, is that what I would want to be referred to?" I don't want somebody to be like, "Oh, there's that big girl over there." No, I want somebody to be like, "There's Deborah. Do you see her? She's blonde hair." Person first. So another one is we can look at this as how it relates to mental illness. The schizophrenic, the bipolar guy. No, he's a person with schizophrenia. It's a person who is bipolar. We don't ever want anybody to define us by one part of us. We want to be seen as that mosaic that we've talked about before, that we're a million little pieces put together. But if you pick out one piece of a person and use that, you're sort of diminishing all the other pieces. That's why pronouns are important. Different is not a deficit. It's not something less. And that's why I think using pronouns, the right pronouns for people or asking someone what their pronouns is becomes super important because you're honoring their personhood as a whole person without reminding them of what you think they should be. If you see someone who is trans male but appears to you very female and you're inclined to call them a she because you believe they look more female than male, when in doubt, use they, them. Don't put your perception of the box that person should be in your language. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody did this? I don't think it's going to happen, but we're going to try. So if we want to think about ourselves as maybe that 1 in 4, if you're the person with a disability or with a mental illness, I want you to think about, what do you want to be known by? And if you can internalize that concept, you will be much kinder with how you characterize other people. I have a poem for you by Rupi Kaur, Kaur. When the world comes crashing at your feet, it's okay to let others help pick up the pieces. If we're present to take part in your happiness, when your circumstances are great, we are more than capable of sharing your pain. And I like that because it's the idea that a person is a person, that a person has ups and downs, and that we don't just look at a person as one great thing or one bad thing. Because let's face it, there's a lot of invisible disability out there. There's a lot of people walking around with things that you don't see or understand. I remember reading about somebody getting really angry at someone who parked in a handicap spot, who appeared to walk into the store and be normal. And the person had cancer, and the person was going through a lot of treatment and was very weak and had that placard for that reason. But somebody actually came up to them in the parking lot and said, "Why are you in that spot? What's wrong with you?" Oof. Crazy on so many levels, right? You're not entitled to that information. And also, not every disability has a crutch or a weird behavior that you don't understand, right? I have known people with schizophrenia who have been the stereotype. They have been living in houses with cockroaches and talking to them. They have been thinking that things are coming out of their vents. But I've also seen people with schizophrenia who achieve their PhD and work in jobs and have families and are brilliant and kind and successful. So there is no stereotype. So where's all this come from, right? This comes from years of history, and this is where we're going to take a fun little dive into some of the historical media trends around mental health. And these are interesting because I've sort of watched these as a person growing up, but now I look at them from my lens and I see how interesting these things are in the way they shape society. So we'll start with the 70s. Some of you older people will remember this. Some of you may not. There was a big story in the 70s, Sybil, about Sybil. It was a book. It was a movie released in 1973, I think, with Sally Field. And Sybil was a real life person with 16 personalities. She had then what we called multiple personality disorder. Now it's called DID, dissociative identity disorder, just so you know. But multiple personality disorder emerged, and it was fascinating. Everybody was captivated by this psychiatrist who wrote about her patient, Sybil. And Sybil had 13 separate personalities from traumatic experiences that split off. You guys have probably seen a modern version of it in the film Split. I think it was an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Emily, you always know movies. Yeah. Yes. So Split was this movie where this person inhabited all these different caricatures of personalities. And the interesting part is it wasn't totally off. Now, obviously, people are not growing muscles. But I've worked with people with multiple personality disorder, which now we call DID, and it's extremely rare, but it does look pretty wild. I've had people that when they walk in, I can see the personality by the way that their body looks. The eyebrow is different, the mouth is held differently, the walk is different, the voice is different. It's a pretty fascinating phenomenon. But in the 70s, all of a sudden when this came out, it started popping up everywhere. A lot of people had it. The truth was, most of them didn't have it. And it's actually very, very rare. In all of the thousands of people in the course of my career that I've touched in one way or another, I have only seen 2 genuine cases. 2. And when you see it, it's pretty intense. It's pretty much the result of severe, severe trauma. But what happened in the 70s was because everybody was talking about it, a lot more people were emerging with it. And what happened is the fervor died down. We realized that, you could screen it out. Not everybody had it, but a lot of people suddenly thought they had something that didn't exist before. And the interesting thing is Sybil, a few years ago, wasn't that long ago, it was exposed. It was a hoax. So she didn't even have it. Apparently, it was a terrible hoax because it was a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I don't remember exactly, that prompted Sybil and encouraged Sybil and sort of created this whole story. And she wrote a book and she made a ton of money. So it's really unfortunate. But is dissociative identity disorder, multiple personalities, is it real? Yeah, it's real. It's one of the worst things that can happen to you. But, is it common? No. But that's what we learned in the 70s, that everybody had it. Another one in the 80s and 90s was recovered memories. So this one was wild. All of a sudden, practitioners like me were digging through people and going, you could have had something really bad happen and you just don't remember. And the biggest case of this was around satanic abuse, that there were all these stories about all this secret satanic abuse where people were raised in cults and saw people killed in front of them and all these horrific things. And the truth of it was is that a lot of that was untrue. And people went to jail, people's reputations were ruined. It happened a lot with child abuse, that people were remembering people abusing them. Now, there's some real dangerous lines here. There, it is very true. I have had people who have suppressed memories that arise. They arise from a trigger that they encounter. It arises from a dream they have, from a flashback. It is a real thing. Again, it's pretty rare. It's not happening all the time. But we're also not digging around. I'm not sitting you in front of me and going, I bet you got something in there we can dig out. But what happened with this trend was is a lot of people began to believe that they had repressed memories and were encouraged by not great practitioners to remember them. And as a result, people went to jail, people's reputations were ruined. And maybe some of it was true, but it wasn't widespread like that. And then, oh gosh, this is the ugly one too. In the 2000s, it came to light that people were doing something called conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is where you take a person who is queer or trans, gay, lesbian, bisexual, gender, sexual orientation issues, according to them, and they fix you. There is no scientific proof that anything in this technique changes you from gay to straight. But yet people were sending their children to camps and to practitioners to pray the gay away. There's a lot of religious angle in it. Not always, but sometimes, or to be cognitively behaviorally trained to be straight or to identify the gender with the gender they were born in, to not be trans. And conversion therapy was legal and recently has been unendorsed by people like me and in my field. It is rejected, it is criminalized in a lot of places. So you cannot send your kid away to pray away the gay or to therapize them away from being trans. Not okay. But some countries have made it illegal. In the United States, only some states have. There are states in this union where you can go and you can get this therapy. Now, the people that practice it, their boards and their regulating facilities don't allow it. But conversion therapy was a very big thing, that if your kid was gay, you could send them to a camp. Horrible, horrible trend. Another one that happened a lot in the later 2000 was bipolar disorder. Everybody had bipolar disorder. I wrote my first master's thesis on differentiating bipolar disorder from other disorders because it was overdiagnosed. Depends on what you read. Some people say it's underdiagnosed, but there was a time when it was acknowledged that it was overdiagnosed. I was a person who spent 20 years of my life thinking I had bipolar disorder from 24 to 44 because some careless doctor at 24, when I was going through a really rough time, determined that I had bipolar disorder. So I spent 20 years of my life looking at myself through that lens. I didn't. I didn't have it at all. But a doctor told me that, and it stayed with me. So this is why it's important that we don't look at trends, we look at realities, right? So, the new one, and you all know this, everybody has autism, everybody has ADHD. This is where we have landed in 2025. Everybody is saying, I think I'm on the spectrum. Everybody's saying, I think I have ADHD. Now, part of this is kind of good, and I'll tell you why. It's because we're talking about neurodivergence. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about having brains that are different, right? I kind of like that. I like that people were going, why do I behave this way? But what I don't like is where the answer is a diagnosis that may or may not be correct. So, mental health symptoms overlap. You can have one symptom and it could mean a lot of different things. So, people also like to belong and they want an explanation and they want a miracle. Right? So when I was having a really hard time and somebody said you're bipolar, I went, oh, well, that's what it is. That explains everything. But there was a big error in that. The truth was I had PTSD. So I spent all those years believing there was something wrong with my brain instead of working on the trauma that actually caused the reason I was having symptoms. Do you see why this is powerful, right? So if you say, I have autism, and autism becomes the excuse to be dysfunctional, and you don't have autism, then you're not really working on the thing that you actually do have. The danger too with ADHD is a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's my ADHD. I can't do that." I'll tell you what, I have ADHD. I work with people with ADHD. There's a lot we can do, but ADHD is an explanation and an understanding, but not an excuse. So I love the idea of neurodiversity. This is sort of what we're talking about here, that there are great variants in the structure of our brains, just from an anatomy standpoint, and there are great variants in our views as people. So neurodiversity says that all of us look at the world differently and we're not better or worse for it, just different. And I like that. So the good thing about neurodiversity is that it takes away that binary of you're normal or you're not normal. And instead it says we all exist on a spectrum, right? So when we remove the binary from things, we can look at things a little bit differently. Like Christianity. When I grew up, it was you were Christian and everything else was wrong. And it was like this binary of, okay, if you were something other than Christian, then it was wrong. So Christian was the right and everything else was wrong. So neurodiversity is really good in the way that it opens up this range of normal, just like we all know that there are lots of different religions and lots of different perspectives. And it's not that you're Christian or you're wrong. It's not that you're mentally okay or you're wrong. It's that we all exist on a spectrum in our genetics and on our mental health and in all the things that we are. There is no normal, right? You hear people say that. What is normal? The truth of it is there is no one standard by which we should all be compared. So if you think about that and you think about mental health disorders, a lot of people will ask me, what are you born with and what do you get? And I think it's such a great way to conceptualize this conversation is that there are some things that people are born with and that they can't help and that are a very real part of who they are. And then there are other things that we acquire over time. So the good news is that a lot of mental health disorders are acquired over time, which means that if you pick them up, you can put them down. So I like that a lot, but there are some that are not that simple. We kind of divide things into categories. So we say there's neurodevelopmental, right? So neurodevelopmental is the stuff that you are born with. So things like autism spectrum disorder and ADHD are things that are born in your brain. And there's some argument about that. A lot of people you've probably read that think that autism comes from something or that ADHD can show up in your environment. But the standard belief system in our field is that those are things that you're born with. There are also neurocognitive disorders. These are things that you were fine and then you got. So this is like dementia, Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury. These things all change the way that you are in the world, but it happened to you later. So the other category is mental health disorders, but we can even divide that. Things like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia have been determined to be genetic. Now, are there things in your environment that can affect them? Yes, but they're also born in you. That if you have schizophrenia in your family, you do have to be a little more aware that there's a genetic predisposition for it to happen again. So, this is what I say about having kindness around these things is you don't know when you're talking to somebody if they had a parent that has schizophrenia or if they're petrified that they're going to have children that have schizophrenia. So these things are really important to be sensitive about and to understand. Um, a lot of mental health disorders are acquired through your environment. PTSD, anxiety, depression, a lot of these things are it's suggested that there's a genetic factor to some of them, but we can be pretty clear usually in looking at people's environments as causes of these. And truth of it is we're soup. We're a whole soup full of stuff. We have genetic things in us, we have things that happen to us. It's very hard to sort out what is what. And I know in some cases I've worked with, I'll give you an extreme example. I had someone who when I worked in a program for sex offenders, and he was young, he was under 21, and he had been offending on very young children. and you look at it and you go, this is a demon. This is an absolute demon. He's terrible. And what I began to learn as I sat across from him was that he was a mix of things. He had developmental disabilities. His intellect was low. He was not intelligent. He had been horrifically abused and sexually abused from the age of 2, and that he had a personality disorder, and that he had super high anxiety, right? This guy was a soup. There were a lot of reasons why he became what he was, but that's an extreme version. But I want you to realize that we're all a soup. In that case, we could see where all those things led. But understanding that soup of him, I knew that treating him would probably not have as good of a result as it would with other people because there were so many things in the way. So we've got a mix of stuff going on in us that make us either more likely to get better or more likely to not. And that's why categorizing someone as one thing, when within that one thing, the range is so broad. So I want you to kind of start to think about, when you hear all of these things and you think, I have that, and oh, I might have a piece of that. I want you to believe that's valid. If you're attracted to the diagnosis of ADHD for some reason, there's obviously something in it that you see that feels like you. That's valid. That's not you being a hypochondriac. That's valid. But keep in mind, when you're taking online assessments, as we all do I have autism? Do I have ADHD? You have something called confirmation bias. If you take a test going into it thinking that you already have it, you're going to lean your answers into getting the answer that you already believe. It's confirmation bias, psychological phenomenon. So this is why it's important, if you really get to the point where you think you have something, go to the therapist, go to the doctor and say, I think I have this. What's the next step? And get tested. It doesn't hurt anything. Your insurance probably covers it. Go get yourself checked out and get it out of your head one way or another, because maybe it's true. And if it's true, you make your path forward. If it's not true, you release it. So, what are the factors in mental illness and these things? Number one, genetics. If you have a parent with schizophrenia and you start having symptoms at a certain point that look like schizophrenia, that's a factor. Psychological factors like your personality, like the way that you cope with your stress. The other factors are environment and social factors, like are you alone? A person with anxiety tends to suffer longer with anxiety when they don't have support. So, this is why it gets tricky to self diagnose, because one symptom can look like a million different things. And you don't know that. If you take your one symptom and you say, oh, I keep forgetting things. Well, you could look up dementia and you could have that. You could look up ADHD and you could have that. But the truth of it is that this is why you need people like me, is because when I look at your one symptom, I see all of the things it could be and start crossing them off the list. So if you came in my office and said, I keep forgetting things, I'm going to look at your age. If you're 20, I'm not going to think you have dementia, but if you're 70, I might. These are all the things it could be. Your medications, street drugs, dementia, aging, stress, anxiety, depression, PTSD, ADHD, and PMDD. Those are all the things that it could mean when you say, I keep forgetting. It is a lot different to have dementia than it is to have anxiety. So I need to look at you and look at all of the pieces of you to see which direction to go in. It's hard for you to do that on your own. So if you have a symptom that's bugging you, don't decide what it is, present it to somebody and work through what it is. So the most common things that we think we have or that we use in a kind of flippant way, I'm going to go over those today. Um, let's start with, what are they really? Autism spectrum disorders. What are they really? Autism is a disorder of social communication and sensory processing. I'll say it again: social communication and sensory processing. Most people who are autistic do not have deficits in their intellectual abilities. They are perfectly smart and capable of navigating intelligent kind of conversations and situations. Their struggle is in the social aspects of that, reading the signs that people present. It's in sensory, that the tag in their shirt can distract them from having a good day, right? But it's all of these things together in sort of a pile at a high level that dictate autism. You could have sensitivity to a tag in your shirt. Doesn't mean you have autism. Um, Autism, we look at, is there a satisfaction in repetition and routine? Are you happier with everything staying exactly the same? Because if it doesn't, it's overwhelming and stressful. Also sounds like anxiety, though, doesn't it? So that's why differential diagnosis is important. So it's a very easy conclusion to come to that you have autism because you're uncomfortable in social situations, but might be a little disrespectful to a person who actually has autism versus you who might have social anxiety, and they're treated entirely differently. The other one is ADHD. Now, we've all heard a lot about it. It's about attention difficulty, impulsiveness, hyperactivity, but it's also about a way of thinking. ADHD is a thinking style, and the range of thinking styles within ADHD is wildly different. Even men and women often present differently with ADHD. ADHD presents differently later in life. So it's a wide range, but there are a certain bunch of markers that have to occur. So don't just assume you have it. I want you to get checked. Get checked. Find out. Because if you do, once you understand it about yourself, it isn't such a burden anymore. You can go, oh, that's why I do that, right? It's a good thing. Bipolar. A lot of people will say because someone has a mood that they're bipolar. Truth of it is moods go up and down. I want you to have all the moods. I want you to have the up, the down, the in between. Humans have moods. That's what we do. So it's normal. Bipolar is where the moods are so extreme that in those states, the person does things they wouldn't normally do. So, in a heavy, heavy, high mania situation, a person could go out and spend $5,000. They could go out and do a lot of drugs. They could go out and do something completely out of character. They could think that they're Jesus. A high level manic mood can be psychotic. So, we're not talking about somebody who's happy and sad. We're talking about somebody who has these extremes. The depressive end of bipolar can be dark, dark, dark depression where the person doesn't even see their way out of the hole. Now, that's pretty serious, right? That's scary. That's what real bipolar is. And real bipolar, the person vacillates between these two steps, or these two extremes at different rates. Now, bipolar is serious. The person has that the rest of their life. They will likely take medication and they will have a higher rate of suicidality, completed suicide, than other mental health disorders. So, bipolar disorder is serious. We don't want to tell somebody they're bipolar. It's a lifelong disorder. And then my favorite, I'm so OCD. Please don't say this to me. It bothers me. And the reason it bothers me is because treating people with OCD is some of the hardest work I've ever had to do. OCD is not just where you put things neatly on shelves. It's not just where you have to check to see if the door is locked once or twice. OCD is excessive thoughts, right? That's the O, obsessive, excessive, that lead to repetitive behaviors. Obsessive compulsive disorder. I have obsessive thoughts and I have to compulsively act as a result. Obvious one is hand washing, right? Oh, I wash my hands a lot. Okay, good, you should. But the hand washing person that I treated, they washed their hands all day. They had 18 separate steps in the hand washing process. And if they did one wrong, they would start over. So this poor soul would be in the bathroom sometimes for 3 hours, starting over, starting over, starting over. Their hands were bloody and it was paralyzing. They couldn't work. They couldn't have relationships. They couldn't eventually leave the house. That's OCD. That's what real OCD is. And it's not just washing your hands too much. We all have compulsive behaviors. We all have things we're anxious about, but this is where it blocks out everything else. OCD manifests in very strange ways. I had one person who was fired from her job, and she called her job every day for years and said, "Can I have my job back?" And the dangerous part was it was a school. So the school got a restraining order, and the school eventually forbid her from being on the property. And by the time I got her, it was nobody, there was nobody in her life anymore because every conversation was, "Do you think I could get my job back?" So I get her, I get into our session and we talk, and I'm like, "Wow, I'm going to fix this." And she was great. And we go through the whole thing and we rationalized it and we made goals. And at the end of the session, as she's walking out the door, she looked at me and she said, "So do you think I could get my job back?" Everything I said went right out. And she suffered. Her whole life was obsessed with the idea of getting that job back. So something in your brain sticks and it sticks and it sticks. That's OCD. It's also really strange thoughts sometimes. I had someone who couldn't be in a room with women because he was afraid he would get them pregnant. He couldn't ride the subway. He couldn't sit in a room with his sister. He had this fear that if he were near a woman that she would become pregnant by him. Now we can look at that and go, "Well, that's crazy, right? That doesn't make any sense." It doesn't make any sense, but it sure did make sense to him and he believed it. So imagine from my end, you're working with this disorder where people believe their own truth, which we all do to an extent, but believe something so irrational it's harmful to them. So the next time somebody says they're so OCD, you'll recoil like I do because you'll feel that that's really not nice. It's a big deal. What I want you to think about is, are you putting people in boxes? Are you putting yourself in a box? Are you looking at yourself like, "I'm different than other people? I am so blank," right? My ADHD, oh, it screws me up, right? We don't want to put people in boxes and we don't want to put ourselves in boxes, but we do want to seek to understand. But we have to understand within the limits of privacy and respect. And what you think you know about a person based on a label might be completely different. Think of something like cancer, right? When you hear someone has cancer, you immediately have 1,000 questions, right? What kind of cancer is it? Are they going to die? What is the stage? What are they getting chemo? Are they getting radiation? Can they work? Are they going to lose their hair? All these questions go through your mind. And the truth of it is you're only going to know what that person shares. And you're not going to push. You're not going to ask all these questions unless you're close enough. And I want you to look at mental health that way. Every diagnosis we talked about has a million different pieces and a million different meanings. You could be working with someone with severe bipolar disorder sitting at the desk next to you who's been taking medication for years and has it well controlled, but fights it every day. So you don't want to put bipolar as a slur on anyone because that's a person who's really living it, who's really championing it. I can't talk. That's a person who's really overcoming it. So people will share what they want to share, and we don't want to ask inappropriate questions, but we want to make sure that you're comfortable with the aspects of your identity that you want people to know. And that's really where I want to leave it with you today is that I want you to view it a little bit differently. When you see someone who's a hoarder, I want you to go, "They're not just a hoarder, they're a person. They're a person with a clear mental health disorder who is hoarding. They're not a hoarder. They are a person who is hoarding because they're suffering." Are you giving yourself that same grace? If you are a person with anxiety or social anxiety or depression, are you just looking at yourself like, "I'm a depressive. I'm a person who's depressed all the time"? Or are you saying, "No, here I am. This is me. This is Deborah." But Deborah also has PTSD and has ADHD And I'll share that only when I feel it's appropriate because I want you to look at Deborah, not a label, right? So, my sunshines, I want you to have compassion for others, as I know you do, because you wouldn't be here if you were not a compassionate, caring, curious person. But my sunshines, I want you to have compassion for yourselves and enough curiosity to explore things that might be all around you, and also to answer your own question: what's wrong with me? And maybe it's not wrong. Maybe it's just a label that might help you, or maybe we're carrying labels that don't help us at all. So, either way, my sunshines, take care of yourselves, be compassionate with yourselves and others, and I'll see you next time. Bye.